Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
A bit about me before I delve into this story. I'll be intentionally vague about specifics. If you've worked in cybersecurity or for the government, you'd understand why I'm cautious. I graduated high school in the late 2000s. College didn't work for me, so I enlisted as planned. I joined the Navy, passed qualifications for the Special Warfare Training Block during basic, and started training to become a Navy Sea, Air and Land SEAL team member. I didn't complete SEAL training because it's incredibly challenging, but I became a Special Warfare Combatant Craft Crewman, SWCC, instead known as a boat operator. SWCC are the individuals you see in movies, arriving just in time with fast boats, providing heavy firepower to assist our troops. They sometimes work with helicopter crews or operate the helicopters themselves. Most often, they patrol Iraqi waterways hoping for some action to break the monotony. That sounds more exciting than it was. Besides becoming an expert in small watercraft operations and doing considerable diving and aircrew work, I didn't participate in the high-profile SEAL operations. I did some tasks while attached to a SEAL team, but I can't discuss those. No door breaching or team operations. I only engaged in a handful of firefights. Side note, many YouTube Special Forces operators are former team or group members who exaggerate their roles. Their colleagues often did most of the intense work. They simply recount stories from their perspective, so somebody gets to tell it without revealing identities. I left boat operations after 8 years due to an injury. I spent my last 4 years in special warfare doing more cyber-oriented work. I retired, received my Veterans Affairs card, attended college for a few semesters to prepare for cybersecurity certifications, and have been working in the private sector since early 2019. I even established my own limited liability company. This story begins in early 2016. I had been in my hometown near a major naval base for a while. After changing career tracks and taking medical leave due to my injury, I reconnected with a high school sweetheart. We had been dating for several months. She was my childhood best friend, and I had missed an opportunity to take her to junior prom. We didn't see much of each other after graduation when I enlisted, so we'd grown apart. In the years since we'd separated and reconnected, she had a child of her own, a delightful 3-year-old girl. The father wasn't involved, which was his loss because she was a wonderful child. We quickly grew close, and after a couple of months, she occasionally called me Daddy, which filled me with joy. As for her mother, I had strong feelings for her years ago, and reconnecting only intensified those emotions. Our relationship took off rapidly. We were inseparable for the first couple of months, and when we weren't, on fun outings with her child or behaving like passionate teenagers after putting her to bed. We were texting each other at work and sharing humorous posts on social media. It's embarrassing to admit as an adult in his 30s now, but we were deeply in love. It was real love, something I had never experienced before. I'd faced gunfire and knife attacks, and my injury was from a leg wound, but none of that made me as nervous and frightened as this new love I was feeling. I was completely smitten. However, there was a complication in the form of her brother, a tall, unkempt, wannabe tough guy who started staying on her futon a month and a half into our relationship. This individual had the unfortunate privilege of also being the child's godfather, uncle. He had no blood relation to my girlfriend or the child. He was just a former user of illicit substances who worked at the same Target store. He started experiencing low blood sugar episodes. He was coming down from whatever he had consumed, so she bought him a cheeseburger and soda, which, in that culture, is like being given a handful of gold. He felt indebted to her and became her right-hand man, never pursuing her romantically as he preferred companions similar to himself. Thankfully, she called him brother, and he referred to her as sister, so naturally he was uncle to the little one. This meant when he showed up unexpectedly in the middle of the night midway through our relationship, it was a bad sign for me, because at homeless, now jobless, irresponsible individual was moving in. Our friendship started on a very negative note because he was greeted by me pointing a .45 caliber handgun at his face, wondering why a grown man was in my girlfriend's apartment while we were in bed. And I heard something making noise. Note for any concerned citizens, the child was sleeping between us and they didn't have any pets, so I knew whatever was making noise wasn't anyone in the room and nobody else should have been there. Coupled with recent break-ins in her complex, you can understand why I was justifiably armed. I didn't live there. I had my own studio near the base, but I often stayed overnight because it was convenient and enjoyable. With the recent break-ins, they also felt safer with me there, so it was beneficial for everyone. Naturally, I didn't have any say regarding him living there. In an attempt to appease the young man after holding a firearm to his face, I lent him my PlayStation 3 and a spare TV so he had something to do because he wasn't going to actually look for a job. Instead, he smoked herbs on the balcony all day and played video games on my PlayStation. This individual treated my girlfriend like his mother. He expected her to cook for him when she got home from work, expected her to do his laundry, and once asked her to relace his shoelaces because she does it better. The 23-year-old was unproductive and beyond being a live-in babysitter for the actual child when my girlfriend and I were at work because my medical leave eventually ended, served no purpose. We'd come home to a messy kitchen and clutter all over the apartment. Several times he'd leave waste in the toilet without flushing, and shame on him for asking my girlfriend to do his laundry because I didn't always see toilet paper in the water when I flushed it. That man likely had constant skin irritation, I'm certain of it. He was good with a child though, I'll give him that. She never had a soiled diaper before transitioning to using the toilet, so credit to him for being somewhat useful. This situation continued for 4 more months. Eventually, I was spending so much time there that my girlfriend and I discussed getting an apartment together to avoid paying 2 separate rents. Of course, the troublesome individual was asking us for a spare room, which we argued about because 4 months after moving in, he still had no job. The person who bragged about being a successful illegal substance distributor in his late teens, laughable, couldn't even sell legal herbs. He claimed to be a professional drift car driver, but he nearly backed my car into a light pole 4 times on the few occasions I trusted him enough to park it for me. Every time we argued or had a minor disagreement, he would say, "I'm going to physically harm you, and if I can't do it myself, I have friends who can and will." I want to reiterate, I was not a Navy SEAL. I didn't go through the rigorous combat training the Navy teaches special warfare operators and team members. I learned some, enough to qualify for special warfare, but what SEALs experience in basic underwater demolition is SEAL training and their supplemental training schools, their individual specialty schools, and whatever clandestine operations the agencies and Joint Special Operations Command have them doing nowadays was completely absent from my career path. We operate boats, we fly in helicopters, we parachute from planes. Sometimes we participate in a mission with a SEAL team, but most of the time it's a partner force operation or some kind of escort operation in territorial waters where we're not supposed to be. Maybe we're extracting a few divers from murky waters and not discussing it for the rest of the journey to the extraction point, because it's one of those missions. There is a reason SEALs are also called frogmen. I was also injured. I could walk on both legs by this point, but if my pain medication wasn't working well, or if the weather was bad, there were days I couldn't stand up straight without leaning on something. But the rest of my body was still in decent shape. I had trained in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu while in the Navy. I practiced Kali and Salat with some Filipino service members I'd met on base. They are why I love Lumpia so much. I learned different shooting stances like center axis relock. I attended close quarters battle shooting courses thanks to my Navy career. I wasn't invincible, but I was certainly capable, and I could seriously harm this individual with my bare hands. No firearm necessary, but I loved his sister, and I wanted to marry her and adopt her child. So I held my tongue whenever he lashed out at me. Weeks went by and every now and then he'd snap at me for trivial matters. I decided I'd had enough, and one night when I was leaving to head home, I took my PlayStation 3 and TV with me. He was furious about that. He declared that I was banned from the apartment, to which my girlfriend reminded him that it's her apartment and her rules and that he needed to be respectful. Then, one fateful morning, perhaps a week after that incident, I had spent the night and we were getting up early because I needed to be on base and she had to go to work. We got out the door with the child, and just as we were buckling her into her car seat, I realized I had left my wallet inside. So I went back to the apartment to retrieve it, and as I was walking towards the front door, the troublemaker spoke up with, "You're cleaning those dishes when you get back." Dear audience, those dishes were dishes he had dirtied the previous night when he made late-night comfort food and somehow needed a mixing bowl and 4 different wooden spoons to prepare it. I looked at the dishes, looked at him, looked back at the dishes, then back at him, and said, "You're confused. Clean them yourself and don't ever tell me what to do again." Before doing the best about face a man can do when low on pain medication and high on discomfort and frustration and walking out the door. I was maybe 6 or 7 steps down their stairwell when I heard the door fly open behind me. I turned to see him coming at me with both hands, and he threw me the rest of the way down the stairs. I landed hard on my back, knocking the wind out of my body and hitting the back of my head forcefully on the concrete deck. My leg erupted with fresh pain. Then he jumped on top of me, snapping me out of my daze, and I went to work defending myself. I gritted my teeth through the pain and started working to get on top of him, where I proceeded to rain down strikes on his face with my fists. I split his lips, I struck him in the eyes and the temple, I even gave his Adam's apple a firm tap. I was furious and honestly didn't care if I seriously harmed him in that moment. Someone had to be neutralized, and it definitely wasn't going to be me. But she saved his life a second time. She was wondering why it was taking so long, and when she heard the yelling, she came running and found me on top, striking him repeatedly. She screamed for me to get off, and I did. As soon as I did, he started talking. "Sister, he threatened to end my life and he attacked me and threw me down the stairs because I asked him to bring back the PlayStation," which she knew was completely false, and the neighbor's security camera outside corroborated that. But in that moment, she was livid, and understandably so. I took her to work. I took the child to daycare. I went to base. I had to explain to my commanding officer why I had bloody knuckles and why I was holding a cold pack to the back of my head. They offered to call the police so I could press charges. I declined. My commanding officer nearly ordered me to call the police, or he'd put me back on medical leave, which he couldn't do technically, to which I replied that I'd rather be on medical leave than lose my girlfriend for calling the authorities on her brother. It was made clear to me in no uncertain terms that I am a particularly unwise individual, and that this decision would come back to haunt me someday. Well, he was correct. Essentially, brother gave an ultimatum: either I leave and she ends our relationship, or he leaves and walks out of her and her daughter's life. To be fair to my ex, that troubled individual had been the only constant male figure in her child's life since birth, so that would have been devastating for the little one, and she wanted to spare her that kind of pain, which meant I was the one who had to go. Honestly, I would have preferred an actual axe to the heart because what I actually felt was far worse. It's one thing to say goodbye to the woman you love, but to also say goodbye to a sobbing little child you wanted so much in your heart to adopt and make your own. I don't want to meet the man who can hold back tears in that situation. That man scares me. I returned to my apartment, put together a small box with the toys, keepsakes, and clothing items they had left behind, and waited for an appropriate time to bring it to her workplace. I was emotionally devastated. But that troublemaker, he wanted to further torment me while I was vulnerable. Remember those friends he mentioned? Well, he wasn't lying. He did have some associates with criminal records and malicious intentions, and in the months following her and I breaking up, he put them to work. I woke up one morning to discover my car had been jacked up, the wheels removed, my catalytic converter cut out, and they had spray painted offensive language and symbols on my car after smashing my windows. I wasn't Jewish and I had been in a relationship with his sister for the last 6 months, but somehow I was labeled with both anti Semitic and homophobic slurs. What my insurance didn't cover cost me $2,500 in repairs. Law enforcement was called, a report was filed, but surveillance footage was useless. Faces were covered, they wore gloves, so no fingerprints were left, and it's not like they're deploying forensic teams to collect DNA evidence from the area for auto vandalism. 2 weeks later, there was an attempted arson attack on my front door. Someone wearing a mask and a hoodie ignited an incendiary device and threw it at my front door's welcome mat. If it weren't for the apartment's fire sprinklers actually working, my apartment would have burned down with me inside because I wasn't going to jump from the third-floor balcony. That was a more serious crime. Law enforcement was very interested in solving it, but again, no usable prints, face covered for the camera, etc. Then it was quiet for a month. My ex had reached out to me when she heard about the fire, and I told her I was certain it was her brother, but I didn't have any proof. She said she'd speak to him, and coincidentally, nothing happened again for a while, until I guess law enforcement came around asking to talk to him because obviously I gave them his name as a person of interest. In the month and some change since our altercation, she had basically forced him to find some kind of work, or she was going to evict him. So he had gotten a part-time position at an auto shop in town that had a reputation for being the one you don't go to, but fine to recommend to someone you dislike. They cut corners everywhere they could, so it was a perfect job for the troublemaker, at least until law enforcement came looking for him one day asking about that fire. The owners didn't like having authorities asking about their employees, so since he'd only been there a week or two, he was terminated. He deeply resented that. So, one night I am returning home from work. I had stopped at the gym on the way, worked up a good sweat, and got some food from the grocery store. I pulled into my parking spot in my enterprise rental, my car was still being repaired, and walked into my apartment. Quick note, while I was over 21 and legally owned firearms and had a concealed carry permit, on days where I was on base, I did not carry my pistol. It's incredibly rare for anyone whose explicit job description doesn't include carries a pistol at all times to be allowed to carry a weapon on base. Since I'm not leaving a pistol in my car, and there weren't any places to securely store a weapon while I was working, I just opted not to take my gun with me. It's also why I did not have a pistol on me the morning the troublemaker attacked me. I was unarmed. I lived on the 3rd floor. There was a 4th floor above me and stairs leading to it. I heard footsteps coming down the stairs rapidly, and I turned to see 4 individuals in hoods, masks, and wearing gloves approaching me. My door was open, so I dropped my groceries and tried to slam the door behind me. They got a foot in and managed to force their way into my apartment. What followed took place over a period of about 14 seconds. The neighbor across the way, after the fire, had a security camera installed outside their door as well, so we know the actual timestamps down to the second. I kept a loaded pistol stored in a closet near my front door. Irresponsible, I know, but I was younger and more naive than I am now. In the struggle with the first individual who came through the door, I managed to reach into the closet, find the firearm, and push myself back in a way to create several feet of space between us. I vividly remember seeing all 4 men in my doorway and hallway, with the first one I had just pushed being stopped from falling backward by the others and starting to approach me again. I raised my pistol, a SIG P2T6 chambered in .40 Smith & Wesson, and just as I heard one of them shout "gun," I began aiming and firing. There were no attempts to wound or scare them. I aimed for center mass and head, as I had been trained. The first individual fell, the second one was hit by 2 of the shots that passed through the first before I struck him in the forehead. The third individual stopped abruptly before being hit 4 times in the torso, and the 4th one was halfway out the door before I emptied the rest of my magazine in his direction through the 3rd individual and whatever I could see and aim at. You might be thinking, oh no, that 4th individual was fleeing, that's murder. You're a killer, Well, law enforcement didn't see it that way, and the investigators didn't charge it as such, because he survived. The first three recipients of my high-velocity projectiles didn't. The first individual's cranial matter was scattered over the second individual's cranial matter was on my wall. The third individual's heart and both lungs were severely damaged by my 40 S&W rounds. He was declared deceased at the scene. The fourth individual was my ex's brother. Of the 3 bullets that struck him, one grazed his posterior, another lodged itself in his right buttock, and the third hit him directly in the spinal cord, around the kidney area. It shattered his spine and completely ended his potential career in competitive dancing and cycling. He was paralyzed from the navel down. He required a permanent catheter for urination and incontinence products for bowel movements. He would never walk again. He would never engage in intimate relations again. When he was healthy enough to be discharged from the hospital, he was incarcerated, given 3 involuntary manslaughter charges since he was held responsible for his 3 associates' deaths. He was also charged with conspiracy to commit murder, assault, battery, and even received reckless endangerment charges for me discharging my firearm in an apartment complex with another apartment across the hall from the open door I was shooting towards. He would never experience freedom again. I like to say that this resulted in a happy ending, that she reconciled with me, that we got married, and I adopted her little one, and we had a couple more children of our own. But she didn't. Within 24 hours, she stated that she was afraid of me, that she didn't want me anywhere near her or her child, that she'd contact law enforcement if she ever saw me near her home or her place of work, which was unfortunate. I liked that target. She called me a killer. She accused me of sending the authorities after him to provoke a response just so I could harm him. She disregarded the arson attempt, the vandalism, and the various threats he'd made towards me in the previous months we were together. I never saw her again. She blocked all communication with me. Her family blocked me. She changed her phone number, transferred to a different target location, and after a couple of months, she moved to a different apartment in another part of town. It has been 8 years since the incident, and I still haven't heard from her. I know she's alive. Mutual acquaintances informed me she got married in 2020, had a second child, and is content, so I'm happy for her. I never got my happily ever after, my dream of a peaceful domestic life. Believe it or not, being forced to defend oneself against 3 individuals, even for a person trained for conflict and prepared for the possibility that one day he might have to do it, affects your mental state, especially when you consider it happened in your home and not in a war zone. There's a significant psychological and emotional disconnect between neutralizing a threat for work and doing so because your life was in immediate danger. I experienced post-traumatic stress disorder. I couldn't handle any of my firearms once I got them back for a full year without experiencing panic attacks. The Navy was very supportive throughout the ordeal, assisting with the investigation, including that commanding officer who had called me foolish giving his statement about the morning I was attacked. I was offered the opportunity to live on base with protective detail until the situation stabilized, but I declined. 8 years have passed. Since then, I've retired. I'm now working in the private sector. I have my own limited liability company, earning substantial income doing cybersecurity and site security consulting. Occasionally, I go boating. My partner of 3 years is the most loving, supportive person I've ever been with. I know they have my back no matter what challenges we face. We're discussing having children before we get too much older. Life is good. But you know what really lifted my spirits? Just the other day, a Google alert I set up 8 years ago was triggered. It was the troublemaker's first and last name followed by the word obituary. It turns out someone in prison became fed up with the annoying individual in a wheelchair talking excessively and trying to intimidate people, believing nobody would harm someone in a wheelchair. They used the wheelchair to cause severe head trauma and used their footwear to finish the job with several forceful impacts. Of course, the obituary doesn't state that. It says he was a bright and lovable young man who encountered difficulties in his early adulthood and ended up incarcerated. The real surprise is apparently He is survived by a daughter none of us knew he had back then, so it's unfortunate for her, but I doubt she ever had the opportunity to know her biological father anyway. Honestly, that's probably for the best.
And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.